Daily on Score North and ScoreNorth.com. Provo Daily, presented by Surly Brewing Company.
Welcome in to Christmas Eve, if you're an NFL fan. The eve before legal tampering opens up across the NFL in Vikingsville, Judd Zulgad. We are here to sort of, and by the way, like anything we say could just become outdated within 5 seconds, as we learned a few days ago. Actually, we sometimes we pre-record stuff for like a Saturday, and we did a couple mock drafts that were instantly irrelevant once the Carolina Panthers traded up for the number 1 overall pick. So
that's a good point.
Yeah,
didn't even really think about that, but yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Absolutely correct.
Now, I think like who the Vikings, like the whole point of the mock exercise is who the Vikings might take, and that didn't. I don't think that changed a whole lot. At least in that exercise. But we're going to kind of paint the landscape of where things stand, some interesting names that the Vikings could potentially look at as fits that have experience with Brian Flores. And then we'll get to, we're going to start with that because I think that's going to be the most relevant thing going into legal tampering. And then just some of the latest things as the Vikings look to make roster moves. But the show is presented by our friends at TCL, now an official partner of the NFL. No matter what you watch, TCL has award-winning TVs for any budget, any space, all with stunning picture quality. And TCL makes more than just TVs. They offer mobile products, audio devices, home appliances. TCL brings you joy and simplicity through innovative technology. So a couple things here, Judley. Number one, the Minnesota Vikings, as of this recording, still have not made the requisite moves to get under the cap. So there will be moves from now until, I mean, technically Wednesday is the day they have to be compliant. But like whether it's a Brian O'Neill restructure or, Dalvin Cook trade or whatever, there's going to be more things that happen. But even without that, right now as we sit here, the Vikings have $120 million in cap space for 2024 by bailing on the Adam Thielen contract. And they might even clear more if they wind up doing something. Like, to me, the Harrison Smith thing is less about, like, they want cap space for this year, but I think they're telling Harry and the agency, like, hey, you're under contract for like 3 more years after this. We don't want any of that. We want full flexibility for 2024. And that actually gives them more flexibility to sign free agents this week. Because if you could backload contracts into 24, 25, especially for younger, like 26, 27-year-old free agents. So it seems like Kwesi is not messing around here over these past 6 or 7 days.
I think what Kwesi said at the Combine in regards to Cousins was basically a blanket statement about all veterans who are nearing the end of their contract, which is he wants security, we want flexibility. Like, that's true of everybody. It's true of the Cousins. It's true of Dalvin Cook, I'm sure, Harrison Smith. And so, yeah, I think it's incredibly smart. I think what the Vikings are saying is, we can't make you guarantees here. You're going to have to take a pay cut. And we're not going to... in the case of Zadarius Smith, who wants more right now, and said, well, then if you're not going to give me more, just release me. And the Vikings are like, no, we'll do what we want. So I like this Kwesi more than last year's, just for the sake of, last year you were like, are they really going to just run this thing back? And it turned out to work. But I like this, what they're doing right now, because it very much looks like they have a long-term plan now. And I think that was the thing I was most perplexed about and potentially concerned about. Yeah. It might be a year too late because, to go back to what we've talked about a few times, you probably forfeited your right to get a trade return on some guys. If you traded them a year ago, you probably could have gotten something for them. But all that being said, just being in the present right now, I love what they are doing. I absolutely think it's the right play. If you take a step back for a year, that's fine. In this league, unless you try and get so crappy, you're not going to be bad for 3 years. You probably won't even be bad for 2 years. You might even surprise teams. So, but I mean, this is not the National Football League is not a 5-year league. Yeah. It's not the old, well, we're going to tear it down and see it in 2000, in this case, 28. So I think that this is absolutely the right play. I think it's brilliant. Now, this is also going to come down to scouting and personnel decisions of who they bring in, of course. So we'll wait and see on that. But as far as the tearing down the house, I applaud every move that they've made and every move that they will make.
Also, like, it's hard to be, as long as you have Justin Jefferson, Christian Darrisaw, Brian O'Neill, TJ Hawkinson, They've got some young players that are interesting on defense. If you keep Danielle Hunter around, if you've got 5 or 6 guys like that, it's unless those guys get hurt, obviously, it's really hard to go 3-14 if you've got star players like that. So we'll get to some of the latest on just some of the internal guys in the second half of the episode, but let's start with the external and just some names. Like, let's start with just positions, I guess, and then we can kind of go from there in terms of names that you should have an eye on as a fan as the next few days progress here. But where do you think they stand in terms of position need? What is the number one position that you think is at the top of their whiteboard that they have to address here, starting in free agency?
Well, I think that was probably driven home again Friday with the self-inflicted decision to release Cam Dantzler. They have to get, I mean, forget top-notch cornerbacks. They have to just get cornerbacks. They've got 4 under contract right now. About 2 of those guys is probably being counted on to play. Patrick Peterson and Duke Shelley could come back, but we don't know because they are free agents. And so I think, so here's my prediction. I think the Vikings are going to defensively in free agency, and just to be upfront about this, it starts tomorrow. Like, we'll get reports, we'll get contract terms. This whole the legal tampering period has now basically just supplanted what used to occur on Wednesday. Wednesday's almost going to be a formality, but I think the Vikings.
Well, some guys want to take visits. Other guys are just going to agree to terms, right? There's the first wave is just going to be, yep, whatever, cool, sounds good. You want to give me $20 million a year? All right, I'll do a tour when I arrive, I guess.
I also seem to recall from last year, I don't know the visits are as big a deal as they used to be. I feel like it's now just more of a race to, because there's so much tampering that's done. It's like when Kirk, was here for the Super Bowl in 2018 and just happened to take a tour of the Viking. I just happened to drive by. I just happened to look at houses. So I feel like that stuff's being done even before it was previously, which again, I'm fine with. I don't care. But I feel like the Vikings are going to pursue about a couple, at least, what you would consider to be priority free agent types defensively. And I will be shocked if one of them is not a cornerback. Absolutely shocked.
To me, the 5 names to watch, and there's more. There's going to be, in fact, I'm sure you'll see other names pop up, but the 5 names to watch in terms of potential connections to Flores or connections to a similar system, the age range that these guys fall into, which is under the age of 30, but I think even more so skewing closer to 25 or 26 is probably the sweet spot. If you could get that younger end free agent. You've brought up Byron Murphy Jr. a number of times. He's only 25 years old. He hits the market. He's leaving the Cardinals dumpster fire. Yep. Now, PFF had the projection at like $9 million a year. Pelissero was saying it's going to be more like $16 million a year.
Yes.
So he's a former second round pick, and he hasn't quite peaked or lived up to expectations, but a ton of slot experience and a guy who probably has some upside working with Brian Flores could vault his game to a new level. A guy that we, in the 2 exercises we've done where we've put our GM hats on and have kind of gone through the Vikings offseason, we've had Cameron Sutton, former Steeler, on the Vikings 2 different times. So he's projected to make $8-9 million a year. Again, the Vikings have to clear space to make any of these happen. But he's 28 years old. He plays about 20% of his snaps in the slot, just a rock-solid, versatile veteran cornerback. Jonathan, and his direct position coach wasn't Brian Flores, but those guys obviously were in the same rooms together in Pittsburgh last year, so Flores would know. A guy that I think was in rooms was with Flores at one point, or maybe they didn't cross paths, but Jonathan Jones, 29 years old, mostly a slot guy, 7 years in the Belichick New England 3-4 system.
And I think they did cross paths.
Early in Jones' career. Yeah.
That one's an intriguing one. He's a little bit older than I would like from the profile of the cornerbacks I think they should sign, but he would bring you a veteran presence, a guy that knows exactly what Flores wants, and a guy that could probably, more importantly, work with Booth and or Evans and that young cornerback group. That one intrigues me, like on a 3-year contract to take him to the age of 31, 32 years old. Jonathan Jones intrigues me. The thing with Sutton is I don't know. So I don't know how much what Tomlin did, and I don't know how much it reflected Flores' style. And I'm sure that he adopted some things. I'm sure that the Tomlin's defense at Pittsburgh adopted some of what Flores liked to do and stole ideas, or he was given ideas. But Jonathan Jones seems to me to be more of a fit, probably because that's going to come directly from what Flores did with the Patriots.
Yep. Two more at least to just have these names top of mind, Vikings fans. This one got released, and I don't think he has signed anywhere. If you get released in the last few weeks, you can actually sign before.
Yeah.
But Bobby McCain, who is projected to, as a 29-year-old, make less money than, let's say, a Cameron Sutton in free agency. He was cut by Washington. He's kind of a slot cornerback safety hybrid who can play up in the box. Mm-hmm. And he did play with the Flores system when Flores was in Miami for 3 years. So that's someone to watch. And then this is only just sort of, I haven't seen this name, and I don't think there's any like direct Flores connections here, but Rock Ya-Sin, 26 years old. He's been with the Colts and the Raiders in his 4-year career, projected to make around $9 million a year because of his age. Just a really good cover corner who can play man coverage at a high level. And so you need guys that can play man coverage, that can press. You need guys also that can play slot potentially, just versatility and also comfortability on an island at times when Flores goes cover zero and gets frisky at the line of scrimmage.
I love to hear cover zero.
Ed Donatil doesn't quite know what that means.
He didn't approve of that. Rockison intrigues me a lot. So he's not coming off a great year. But what intrigues me a lot about him is that age, 26. Like, that's the type of guy that you could probably sign to a 4-year contract, backload the contract a bit, get creative, could count on him playing, for you at 26, hopefully the duration of the contract. That one intrigues me quite a bit. I guess my other question is this too. We need to keep in mind, and while I'm sure there is somebody in the building who's going to get a chance to start, what we need to keep in mind that's very important too is what is their plan in the slot? Because I highly doubt, and I hope Shannon Sullivan's not coming back. So if Shannon Sullivan's gone, you are really looking for a minimum of 2 corners.
Yeah.
And I guess you could draft one in the first round and sign one. But I just wonder if they're going to put a little bit more resource-wise, just pure speculation here, into the defensive side of the ball from a free agent standpoint and try and save their draft picks a little bit more to up the offense.
And to be more, like, if you don't want to go into the draft desperately needing a starting cornerback, right? Although I don't know that that's how they're thinking about the 2023 season. I don't think they're viewing it as, okay, we need to get this player to hit immediately to be great in 2023. To me, this all feels like, all right, we're not tanking in 2023, but our number one goal is to reset with flexibility for 2024.
Yes.
And then align everything with that window. So could you, if you do that and you eat a bunch of dead cap like the Thielen and maybe you eat some Harrison Smith, whatever, could you still squeeze out 7, 8, 9 wins? Of course. You got good. Kevin O'Connell's a good coach. You got good coaches. You got a bunch of good players laying around. And let's face it, some of the players that have either been booted off the island already or players that we're talking about, it's not like Adam Thielen raised the water level for a lot for those 13 wins last year, right? He was kind of, by the end of the season especially, he was kind of just like a guy who would get targeted 3 times a game or something.
This is why I love this approach, though. The schedule is tough. They know that. They're an aging team with salary cap problems. They are the definition of it's time to hit the reset button. And a year ago, that's what we talked about, which is, I think with the frustration at that time, as they didn't make moves for the most part, was when are they going to sort of realize what their plight is? And we could go back. I still think there's a case to be made that if you had just turned the keys completely over to Kwesi a year ago, he probably does more. But I mean, it's just so clear that the mandate was, hey, I think that we can win. And the Wilfs were like, let's try and win. And if you just got the job, I guess you're not in a position to say, screw you. No. But that being said, like, this all times out perfectly because eventually, and this is where the cap is real, eventually you've got to get the cap under control. It's like a bucking bronco, baby.
Yeah.
You might love the bronco, but at some point in time, you got to tame that sucker.
The Bronco's fake. The Bronco is fake.
People don't understand. I appreciate the majority of people that watch us. I don't think the people on Twitter necessarily watch us, but the feedback that I get on Twitter, way more than from this show, is a lack of understanding, it feels like, of how the cap works, and also a lack of understanding about how this league works. Because, when Dukes did the bonus scoop for us on Friday, and Doogie said it is trending, and he was very careful. He said it is trending towards a Harrison Smith release. It's trending that way. He's like, it's fluid. I have no clue, but that's what he was told last. And so he reported that, and I tweeted that information out, and immediately was flooded with, oh man, if they get rid of Harry, that's too much. You can't get rid of Harry. That's, Thielen's one thing, but Harrison Smith's a different thing. Like, this is how the process is supposed to work. They're not violating some code of the process. Yep. This is very, very smart. And you did not fire Rick Spielman and Zimmer to, in perpetuity, just say, let's bring everybody back all the time. This is what a reset means. It's not a rebuild. To your point, it doesn't mean that you're going to win 2 or 3 games, but it certainly means to build yourself back up to a place where you feel like you have a chance to win a Super Bowl, which is your goal. Tough decisions have to be made, and for sure, people have to be replaced.
Yeah. On the Harrison Smith front, and again, hopefully anything Vikings roster related could just make this outdated. But so we're trying to stick more to the external free agents on this episode. But this is the other thing. So in the 2023 sense, if you were to cut Harrison Smith because you couldn't reach, hey Harry, we needed to take a pay cut. Harry says, bleep you, I'm not taking a pay cut. And then pride and ego get in the way, right? I don't know that any team is going to pay Harrison Smith the $15 million base salary that he's owed this year. So the Vikings do have some leverage here, but Harrison Smith has ultimate leverage in that he can just give you the double middle fingers and say, I don't want to play here anymore. And the Vikings would have to say, well, I guess we don't have a choice because we're not going to pay you $15 million. So if you cut Harrison Smith, you have to eat a lot of dead cap for this year. You'd have to eat $12 million in dead cap. You'd save 7. But his contract would be off the books for 2024. So you would then, if you cut Harrison Smith, you'd then have $140 million in cap space for 2024. This is clearly what they're trying to shore up. If there's a way to get Harrison Smith back on the team at a reasonable rate and not muddy up their books beyond 2023, I think they'd love to do that. But Harrison Smith might say, maybe I'll just go play for the Chiefs or something and go have a chance to win a Super Bowl.
And that's absolutely cool. He should. That's fine. But what I love about this entire thing too is, and I think what people don't get is this too. So I've seen, how upset is Justin Jefferson about this whole thing? He's got to be very upset. He's not upset because I'm sure they've explained to him, Justin, to pay you and to pay Christian Darrisaw, Gesundheit, and to pay Christian Darrisaw and to pay a lot of good young talent, which they do have. We're going to have to free up cap space. So yes, they hopefully, and it's trending towards, they're going to have a ridiculous amount of cap space next offseason, but it's not like it's all going to go outside. They are going to keep guys. This is where it's smart. You are internally turning over the roster to prioritize your most important players. No. And again, to your point too, this does allow you, especially a year from now, to dabble pretty heavily in the free agent market. And guess who's going to love that? Justin Jefferson. So this is the process that you can see them doing is actually incredibly smart and should make players happy. They'll be happy. The young players are being more empowered now. Yeah. The team's being turned over to them. It's such a breath of fresh air to see this Vikings team, because it feels like a long time, Phil, since they've done this, to see them pivoting to a strategy that actually sets you up to be good for an extended period potentially.
Yeah. Okay, on the external free agency part, so the cornerback pool, we just went through a few names. There are, in Pro Football Focus's top 200 free agent list, so 200 players across all positions, 17 of them are cornerbacks. So there's there's a lot of options. I'm not saying you're going to wind up, bringing in someone as a shutdown $20 million guy, but you can find starting caliber players, maybe even multiple, in that cornerback pool.
I feel like this list, and the free agent market as a whole is not great, but I feel like the list includes two things: cornerbacks, and so does the draft as well, which is great, and inside linebackers.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God.
There is
list
a
of linebackers,
huge list of linebackers.
And some of these guys are just unrestricted free agents because their contracts are up. There's a lot of guys who've just come off the books, like Eric Kendricks, because they're getting cut because teams don't want to pay bloated linebacker contracts. Yeah. And we've gone through some of these names. We've actually wound up in our Fix the Vikings, Do Their Whole Offseason episodes. Linebacker David Long from the Titans is a guy that we've kind of keyed in on, much to your chagrin, because you don't want to pay middle linebackers. But 26 years old, one of the best run-stopping linebackers in the NFL. He was graded as the 8th best overall linebacker in the league last year. He's not a big hulking. He's quick, nimble. He's 5'11", 225, 230 pounds. And most importantly, played in that 3-4 base defense under Mike Vrabel, that Belichick 3-4 disciple style defense. Aggressive. So a guy like that. But you mentioned it. There are literally Tremaine Edmonds, Bobby Wagner. I don't think you're going to go down that path, but like Levante David, TJ Edwards, Jermaine Pratt, Drew Tranquil, Leighton Vander Esch, Rashawn Evans, Quan Alexander, Devin Bush, Kazir White. I mean, there's literally like 12 or 13 established linebackers on the market. Mm-hmm. And so if you want someone to come in and just be, I think it would make sense. Brian Asamoah is going to start. I think it would make sense to bring in some sort of veteran presence. You don't have to break the bank, but is there someone you can bring in that's played snaps before? Because we're making a lot of assumptions about a middle round pick that's never been a starting caliber player. We're like, oh, he played good for 20 snaps in that Giants game and forced a fumble, and he's faster than the old linebackers. So you're going to have an actual professional come in here and play next to him, I think.
It doesn't need to be a big name, but I think what you would like to do is bring in a guy with some experience who has speed. I think that would be the ideal type of guy that if you could draw up to put by Asamoah, that you would. And I think we're going to see, if I'm not wrong about this with Brian Flores, I think we're going to see the linebackers blitz way more now. And so there's going to be activity from the inside as well. And Phil, the one thing, I thought that stood out on TV in person last year was both of those linebackers were so slow. They were just so slow. I mean, and it doesn't need to be some big name, but it needs to be a guy who's got speed and a guy who has instincts to a certain point. And Kendricks did still have that, but he just couldn't get there.
Yeah.
I do think, like, if I'm prioritizing paydays, obviously, priority one payday is corner, but it does help that list of inside linebackers is that deep. Like, at some point in time, you're going to probably land a relative bargain just because the market's going to be so flooded with these inside linebackers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, on the interior, or in the trenches section, I should say, of the Vikings defense. That's right, the trenches section.
Football.
No. Mm-hmm. So Zadarius Smith isn't gone yet, but it's trending that way.
Yeah, that's a weird one. I mean, I think they're still trying to trade him, but
it's funny. Patrick Mahomes tweeted something earlier today along the lines of like, next week's going to be wild in the NFL. And Zadarius Smith tweeted back with eyeball emojis, and then deleted the tweet. Is Zadarius knocking on the door of Patrick Mahomes?
I'm sure he is, but why did he delete the tweet? That's great.
I don't know. Maybe he thinks it's tampering or something. Maybe his agent told him to delete it. But he's one way or another, he's probably gone. You're either going to cut him or trade him, right?
That's my guess.
Get the cap savings. So as far as edge rushers in free agency, it's one of those positions like quarterback where very rarely do high-end, non-broken edge rushers who are in their prime hit the market. And that's the case again. The best edge rushers available, like Marcus Davenport from New Orleans is available. Jadeveon Clowney, again, is available like he is every year. And these guys are all just kind of broken. Like Davenport only played 490 snaps last year because of injuries. When he does play, he's amazing.
Yep.
Jadeveon Clowney is now 30 years old. Again, only played like 490 snaps last year. There's a bunch of guys over the age of like 29, 30 that you could bring in for depth. Leonard Floyd is a free agent now. Brandon Graham is 35 years old. Probably going to re-sign with the Eagles, but he's a free agent. Melvin Ingram III is 34 years. So, but I don't know that I would spend a lot of money. No. Like, bring me a Kyle Van Noy who's played in the system a couple times for a couple $1 million and go find the next young, beast edge rusher in the draft. That's what I would do.
Let's backtrack to what you said too, because I think that we now need to, I think this part of the conversation now needs to at least work its way in to most of these things. So at cornerback, I think you need one veteran just to be respectable. And Flores is going to play man coverage. So you can't be breaking down back there all of the time, or else you will win 3 games. But when we get to linebacker and the edge, and this depends on what actually takes place with Danielle Hunter as well. But my guess is they're going to try to bring him back. But I think that the edge is where you spend 2023 finding out what you've got. Like, can Patrick Jones play there? Because you'll
draft someone, I'm sure, too. Right?
But again, we're talking about a year where no one says the Vikings are trying to suck, but they're creating a situation to ascend. And short of Justin Jefferson, the development of their draft classes has not been acceptable of late.
Oh man,
like it's not. And so O'Connell especially, I think that the onus needs to be on them to sort of, as they're sorting their cap problems out by trimming players, I think that there also needs to be a priority put on sorting out the draft classes.
Yeah.
Like who can play, who can't play. Patrick Jones looks the part, but he's never really gotten a chance. And so my question is this: can he not play, or are you not playing him? Mm-hmm. That was Asamoah last year. So your linebackers can't really run, but you are barely going to play him. What sense does that make? So I think that there's a lot of opportunity here at certain spots. The edge up opposite Hunter, for instance. Linebacker, perhaps, too, to also mix in young players and finally find out. And if they can't play, they can't play. But if they can, you've been sitting on them for how long now?
Yeah, no, I agree. By the way, while you were talking about just the horrific development in drafting, just for fun, I clicked the cut button on over the cap salary cap calculator on Harrison Smith, Zadarius Smith, and Dalvin Cook.
Yep.
Or the trade button maybe on Dalvin Cook. They'll probably get like a 7th or 6th if they trade Dalvin Cook.
It's about the same though, as far as the.
Yeah, I think it's exactly the same. When you do that, you open up 177 million total in cap space for 2024. Think about that. Now you don't have a quarterback. You're gonna, and some of the free agents that you sign here in the next couple of weeks are gonna eat into that because you're gonna backload some contracts. But I look at this as, I know a lot of Vikings fans are kind of just like, you're sad about Thielen. And by the way, if you missed Patrick Royce telling 45 minutes of Bud Grant stories on the Purple Daily episode we posted this Sunday morning, definitely check it out. Just an amazing historical, some funny stories. He kind of painted the picture of the history of Bud Grant. But I look at the next couple weeks and the next couple years, even if they're not a great contending team in 2023, if they do this right, this is setting up for a really exciting window in 2024. If they nail some draft picks, if they develop some guys from the last couple of years, like you were talking about. Okay, on the offensive side, and there's a few interior defensive. I think they're going to wind up bringing Dalvin Tomlinson back. They got Harrison Phillips. My guess is they probably try and add some depth there in the draft. I don't know that's if they bring Dalvin Tomlinson back, he's like the second best interior defensive lineman on the PFF list. That would really be your big move at that position in free agency, right?
Yes. Yeah, and if he hits the market, I think he gets paid. And I guess that's my question. Do the Vikings value him enough to pay him what another team might? And I don't know that the answer is yes. So, and that's another intriguing one. They are very much operating in a way that we don't know yet. Because like a year ago, they just brought guys back. But now, this is really the first time that Kwesi and O'Connell have operated on what appear to be definitely their own terms. So, like, do they look at Dalvin Tomlinson and say, hell yeah, we got to keep him? Or do they say, yeah, he was okay, but, Team X is going to pay him a boatload, and we're not going to? That's my question.
And he's 29. He's right at that age. That is a position that can age a little more gracefully.
Yeah.
Than maybe, linebacker or something that requires, covering big chunks of the field. But it is an age where you're going to think twice about getting into a bidding war on like a 3-year contract, right?
Yeah, and the Vikings have had some really good players at that position. Dalvin Tomlinson is very acceptable. I don't know, I'd call him a really good player at that position. Like compared to the guys that we've seen there, he's solid, he's good. But I don't think that we put him in the bin of, one of the guys that is just a wall for the Vikings.
Yeah. I mean, you need, you're not going to have Danielle Hunters at every position. So you need good players like Dalvin Tomlinson, but at what price, what age?
Right.
On the offensive side, a lot of things are set. They do have a couple weird decisions to make along the offensive line. Bradbury's a free agent. Ezra Cleveland's going into the last year of his contract. At this point,
yep,
no one is safe on this roster except for like Justin Jefferson and Christian Darrisaw. Ed Ingram played more snaps than any offensive player for the Vikings last year. He was also one of the worst offensive linemen in the league. So there's a handful of good veteran guards in free agency in that $10 million a year range. Nate Davis, Ben Powers, both 26 years old. Isaac Samalu from the Eagles is 29. So we talked about this, a week ago on our Fix the Vikings episode. If you wanted to, and they have yet to do this, I guess they did it with Mike Remmers one time. They gave him a few $1 million to try and fix like right guard. And they did it with Alex Boone like 10 years ago. But lately they've tried to do it with young players. You could probably just fix your right guard problem with a $10 million veteran who's 26 years old.
Yeah. And that would be at that age. If you think that Ingram can't play, if you went out and got a free agent right guard who is 25, 26, coming out of contract 1, because I mean that player would still be on your team. So let's say that you're assuming that you're not certainly going to be great in 2023. That player would still be on your team into the time that you become competitive again. Mm-hmm. Like I told you a couple of days ago, is what I don't know is this: you invested a pretty high draft pick in Ingram and then stuck with him for the entire season, and he wasn't good, but he did improve. So are you going to pull the rug out from underneath him now? Or are you going to say, you know what, he showed enough improvement? I do think this. I think there's a very good chance Bradbury is gone, because I think Bradbury, God bless him, he had a decent year after being just what I consider to be a total bust. He had a decent year, and that's a position where I think that he's probably going to try and shop himself. So the real question as Wednesday approaches or tomorrow might be, what are your alternatives at center as well? And just to be very clear, I would bring Bradbury back, but if he gets offered a boatload or a lot, I'm not going to pay him. I can't do that.
Don't you think? I don't. And I'm kind of with you. It's like you're trying to figure out, all right, what will the move be there? I don't think you can just run the same offensive line back. I don't think you can just bring the same 5 guys back. At times it was improved, but it was still, especially in pass protection in the middle, it wasn't good enough. Ezra Cleveland, really good in run blocking, really questionable. The pressures he allowed, I think it was like top 3 pressures allowed as a guard.
Yeah. Well, here's my question off that point. And I do think Bradbury's probably gone. Do you think that internally, because they drafted Ingram, they didn't draft Ezra Cleveland, internally there might be more of a desire to replace him?
Yeah, I agree. And because he only
I have no idea. I'm just saying.
Well, Ingram's under contract for 3 more years. Right. He's younger. They might think he has more upside. Cleveland's a free agent after the year. I don't know that there's trade value for Cleveland. I don't know that you could get like a 6th or 7th round pick for him. If you decided that you wanted to cut Ezra Cleveland, you would actually save about $2.6 million net to your salary cap this year, and then he'd be off your books anyways. So you're thinking, well, all right, if we're looking for a solution at guard and we can get someone who's, and by the way, Cleveland's 25. 2 or 3 of these free agents I mentioned who are better than he is are 26. So my guess is they're kind of looking at all of it as equal. Like with that, you're right. Ed Ingram, well, it's team control for 3 more years. He's young. He's got upside.
We drafted him. Yep.
If we're gonna make a move, let's just say goodbye to Ezra Cleveland and get someone in to solidify.
But if Bradbury's going to walk, then do you just say, well, we can't afford or don't have the ability to really replace 2 interior offensive linemen, and we have to replace the center. Like, there's a lot of things here at work. I would rather hang on to both my guards and bite the bullet there than I would pay Bradbury a substantial amount. I mean, Garrett Bradbury would have to come back on my terms if I'm the Vikings. Yeah. And I think somebody else, because this always happens, is going to come along and say, hey, kid, you turned it around last year. We'll pay you. And at that point, I'm like, see you, Garrett. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I think it's so tough, man, because there's only, well, I guess is it the Colts center that's now available too? So I guess there's like 3 or 4, including Bradbury, 3 or 4 viable veteran centers.
And he's got a pretty high cap hit, I believe. I believe he's available via trade, correct?
Yeah. See, I don't know.
That's not happening.
You're not giving up. They've already given up 3 or 4 draft picks for players the last 12 months.
But this goes back to my question though, Phil, because so O'Connell is an offensive guy. He is the 180 of Zimmer, right? So would the Vikings strategy be a bit more to try and fill defensive needs through free agency where it's more of a certain thing and address center again in the draft?
Yes, but you can't go into the draft without a starting center on your roster, right?
I don't disagree with that, but I'm just saying, like, you could still sign one. I wonder what the strategy is going to pivot to as far as the actual personnel building philosophy here. Like Brian Flores is going to have some say. I'm not saying that they're like, Brian will pick a couple free agents, but no draft. That's not going to take place. But I just think there's going to be a shift in how things are thought of here. And O'Connell's definitely going to pride himself more on being able to identify offensive talent, in my opinion. Yeah. And it's his team. So like would he say, you know what, let's fill a cornerback need, but with the first round pick, again, to go back to what we've talked about, if one of those receivers falls to the Vikings, make that the guy to play opposite of JJ.
And speaking of receivers, so in terms of external free agent options, the Vikings were at an Odell Beckham Jr. workout, according to, did Doogie report that? According to
no, I think it was Pelissero reported it. Okay. Doogie definitely did not. I think it was 11 teams, if I'm not mistaken. I saw it on Twitter.
OBJ doesn't really fit the timeline. He's coming off a big injury. He's 30 years old.
If he could have come back in 2022, he fit the timeline perfectly. But now, no. And I think you're right, too. I think the other thing that we need to get past is looking at veteran players whose names we know and assuming
DeAndre Hopkins is available. Right. Yeah.
That's not how this is going to work.
Agreed.
It used to work that way. And if you're ready to pop, I'm all for that. But Jalen Ramsey, the Dolphins got him for nothing. Well, the Vikings aren't in a position now, in my opinion, to be making a splash like that, because I would prefer to go back to our conversation. I would much prefer that you get a corner in his mid-20s who's going to develop and not be, in 2018 that Ramsey got traded by the Jaguars to the Rams, 2017?
Yes, I believe it was
18.
17 was the year they went to the AFC title game, right?
So when that came down, I said, trade for him. Give up a first-round pick. You need a cornerback like that. He's unbelievable. He's still young at that time. But that was a very different situation because that Vikings team was always, it felt like, on the precipice of something. Mm-hmm. Right now, they're purposely taking a step back.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I think with all these free agents, if their age starts with a 3, there might be a couple guys. You might have to sign a veteran guard, and I know this is the 100th time I brought up the name Kyle Van Noy, but he's 32. Mm-hmm. He's a versatile edge linebacker who can play in. He's played with Brian Flores for half of his career or more in New England and in Miami. So like I could see that, but you're not breaking the bank for him. But you're not paying $15 or $20 million for a guy like OBJ. To me, the only wide receiver that makes a ton of sense continues to be in free agency anyways, age-wise, skill set, is DJ Chark.
Yep.
He's 26. He's a really good deep threat. He's had injury problems, and so that's why his price might benefit you that he has injury problems, because his price tag is going to be low. PFF projects like $11-12 million a year, which for a good wide receiver he has 1,000-yard season in his past with the Jaguars when he's healthy. So I could see that. But again, where do you want to spend your chunks of money in free agency? His age would make some sense. Mm-hmm. He aligns with Hawkinson age-wise. He's a year older. Other than that, Judd, like Michael Thomas is a free agent. He's 30.
Yeah, I'm good here.
Juju Smith-Schuster is 26, but isn't he likely to go back to Kansas City? You know, Jacoby Myers. I know people are going to say Jacoby Myers. He's the number one or number two. But I think OBJ is probably the number one free agent receiver. Jacoby Myers. But again, he's going to probably bring in $15-20 million a year. You're about to pay Jefferson. So do you want to be paying two receivers $20-30 million? Probably not.
I think what they're going to do is I really think that they are. I will not be surprised if their first round pick, unless they shock us and trade up and take a quarterback. I really think that there's a fighting chance that they will try and sign a cornerback or two, and draft a receiver. Yeah. It makes a ton of sense. And you're right too. You do not want to be paying. I mean, keep in mind, with all of the cap space that we're talking about that's going to become available in 2024, Justin Jefferson, starting in 2025, is going to be paid like a quarterback. And if you want him, there's nothing that you can do about that. You can't bring him down and be like, hey, JJ, why don't you take a little bit of a pay cut? So the reality is you're going to have different issues cap-wise eventually here. And so how do you address them? Well, if I draft a receiver in the first round this year, 5 years, team control, option year is expensive, but it sure is not what the market bears. And I think DJ Chark's going to get paid. Like, I love the idea. I think he's going to get paid. You just look at that, that upper echelon of free agent receivers, and the positions become so important now.
Yeah.
I don't think you could get by sleeping well paying Jefferson and Chark at the same time. And so, yeah, I think what you're looking at is ideally they draft a receiver, they sign corners, and then hopefully Andrew Booth Jr., who, by the way, they did trade up to get in the second round, can stay on the damn field.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm just kind of trying to find some other receivers that may make sense. I mean, like Mecole Hardman is 25.
He's going to get paid.
But he's been banged up.
But he's got a ton of speed. I love him. I just think he's going to get paid.
You also got to be a little careful about. I mean, Tyreek Hill, I think, was on a different level. Not I think he was. You got to be a little careful with anyone that was a made man because of Patrick Mahomes. But Mecole Hardman was a second round pick out of Georgia. He's a talented guy. The only other name I would say is like a Paris Campbell, 25 years old, coming out of Indianapolis. With their quarterback situation, is there some more to be tapped into there? I don't know, but it's a pretty thin pool. So, and then the only other position I would say here, just for the purposes of things to keep an eye on here, and this might actually blend into a couple roster nuggets, but running back, the Vikings may or may not get rid of Dalvin Cook. They may or may not bring Alex Madison back. It's just kind of wide open. Over the next few days, there are a ton of veteran running backs between the ages of 25 and 29 that you could easily bring in for $2, $3, $4 million.
Yes.
Not going to break the bank. Enough, a timeshare in the backfield. Ty Chandler can come in and get some carries. Don't you think that's the direction that they go here? Whether it's this year or next year, no longer are they going to have a top 5 cap hit for a running back at some point soon.
I still think that Dalvin Cook is gone. I think he's gone. I think it's one of those things where he's being shopped, and the Vikings aren't going to come out and tip their hand about a guy like that. But the news that was reported on Sunday morning about the Vikings trying to lock up Madison to a contract, which, by the way, can be debated too. I'm not sure he's the right guy. But that being said, I think they're trying. I think they're aggressively trying to get something in return for Dalvin Cook and Zadarius Smith.
Yeah,
I really do. So I think that there's a very good chance he's gone. Just for context on wide receiver contracts, a year ago, Christian Kirk moved from the Cardinals to the Jaguars. 4 years, $72 million, $20 million signing bonus, total guarantees, $37 million. So that was what Christian Kirk got. And he was pretty good, but my point is he certainly was not a guy that when we looked at his name, knocked our socks off as, oh my God, this guy's got to get paid a ton.
Yeah, and actually it was worth it for the Jaguars. He wound up being
He's a good player.
I think the number one target for Trevor Lawrence, 1,000 yards, set career highs in yardage, touchdowns. So, I don't think they're regretting that purchase, but it does show you that if the supply and demand balance is off, then non-elite receivers wind up getting paid elite receiver money.
Yes.
So, just a few things here before we wrap. We should probably wrap and post this. We don't get burned by breaking news here.
This is that time of year, man. I love this time of year. Yep.
But, I think it's pretty obvious what the Vikings' overall plan is with the moves they've made, the moves that they are rumored to be working on. They want to clear bad, bloated contracts of aging players, specifically to create cap space for 2024 and beyond. And some of that also creates some cap space for this year, but this is a clear the decks for 2024 and beyond. How does Cousins fit in? Something to keep an eye on here in the coming days, all right? So Mike Garafolo from NFL Network reports the Vikings and Kirk Cousins have had talks about a contract extension, but nothing is imminent. And Cousins is playing out the last year of his contract and headed toward free agency once again. Feels quite possible right now. So he's kind of, okay, I don't think there's going to be a contract extension anytime in the next couple weeks here. And once you get further down the road, looks like he might just hit free agency in a year. There was a back and forth on ESPN.com between Dan Graziano and Jeremy Fowler with a lot of their inside information. And Graziano says this in the Jets section. He says there's a number of different ways this Jets Aaron Rodgers thing could turn out. Rodgers could still decide to retire. He could decide he wants to stay in Green Bay. There could be another team lurking, a mystery team. If it doesn't work out for the Jets, I expect them to take a run at Jimmy Garoppolo, but also to consider other options, including trades for veterans. Lamar Jackson, Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins. All of these guys could be on the block for one reason or another. Jeremy Fowler follows that up and says, Dan's mention of Cousins is interesting given Minnesota's recent cost-cutting measures. If the Jets miss out on Rodgers, why not place that call to Minnesota with the chance to give Cousins a new contract? Cousins and Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell appear closely aligned, but it wouldn't hurt to check with Minnesota. As of now, he's not under contract beyond 2023. Thoughts?
The next month is going to be so interesting because it's just trended now to the Vikings, and I agree with them. The Vikings have definitely told Kirk, we're good. So unless the Phil Mackey scenario took place in which Kirk crawled into TCO on his hands and knees and says, please, pretty please, I'll play for less, which he's not going to. I think they're just going to wisely allow him to play out his contract. But what makes the next month so intriguing then is, does the Cousins camp say, well, we've always sort of gotten our way here and now we're not, so why don't we look for a trade partner? Well, and do the Vikings say, well, in 2023, we don't expect to be awful, but we're not going to be great. So if we could get a bunch of compensation for your client, we could look into that. Now, do I think he's going to go to the Jets? Absolutely not. I think he would block a trade there. I think Kirk Cousins, even Kirk knows Kirk well enough to know that he probably does not have the stomach for playing in that market. But that does not mean San Francisco is a bad idea. And look, for anyone who said, why would the Vikings trade Cousins to San Francisco? They're competing with them. Well, it's very clear that the Vikings are now taking some steps back to be like, well, really, don't sweat that one in 2023. So all I'm saying is I think through the draft that we're going to be on Cousins watch of some sort.
It's so interesting because if it's been decided, and it kind of seems like it has organically, and the way the Vikings are maneuvering for flexibility in 2024, why would they? Adam Thielen, for instance. This is going to get way in the weeds, but I think our audience can go there with us here. If your whole goal was to create 2023 cap space as much as possible to take one more run at it, right? Mm-hmm. Then you would have used a post June 1st designation on Adam Thielen.
Yes.
Because what would have happened? So the Vikings, by cutting Thielen now without a post June 1st designation, they eat $13.5 million in cap and save $6.5. Those numbers flip if they would have done the post June 1st designation. And by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, you can do a post June 1st on 2 players and use the savings for this free agency period.
That's my understanding. It gets confusing, but that's my understanding.
Yes. So if their whole goal was, hey, let's just, God, we got to say goodbye to Thielen because he's not that good anymore, but we want to maximize this year's cap savings for this free agency class. Mm-hmm. You would have done that. You'd be looking to extend Cousins to smooth out the cap hit, right? They have finally drawn a line in the sand. So to me, if the options are, okay, you can play the last year out, or you can ask him to waive his no trade clause and maybe get some value back from a desperate team like the Niners. Could you get a couple 3rd-round picks or a 3rd and a future 1st or something? Mm-hmm. To me, you should. It would be malpractice if you weren't having those value conversations with other front offices. On the flip side, if I'm Kirk, and maybe by the time people listen to this, some of these, seeds have already been planted or moves have been made. But like, Thielen's gone. He's my guy. Thielen's my guy. Za'Darius was incredible for the first 3 months last year. Za'Darius wants out. If all of a sudden Dalvin's gone and Harry the Hitman's gone, Eric Kendricks is gone, like these team leaders, man, these are Kirk's guys going back 5 years, right? At some point, don't you take control of the situation and say, hey, wow, I guess I didn't realize we were going to turn the page that fast. If I'm Kirk and I want to win a Super Bowl and I see I see what's happening around me, mm-hmm. I would be facilitating the trade to San Francisco myself, right? Like if you want to win a Super Bowl, who has a better chance right now as we sit here?
Well, and get an
the
extension.
49ers do. Yes.
And just get an extension. They'll give you the extension. Kyle Shanahan loves you and he needs, and unless he has madly fallen in love with Trey Lance, which I don't think is the case, they'll give you an extension. The other thing though is, so here's what I think the Vikings privately have been pretty upfront with Kirk though. Because, it's interesting that Kirk's recent comments, like on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast, and then the thing he did at Spire that Doogie talked about, mm-hmm. and saying, being uneasy and saying things like there's going to be change here. At first I assumed that's, no crap. There's changes every year. But it's almost like he was told a lot is coming. Like mm-hmm. you're going to have a lot of your friends gone. And so I think he's reflecting that without revealing he was told that. Mm-hmm. It certainly feels now like he was talking from a position of knowledge, not of guessing. So yeah, I think, and look, the Vikings, if they are going to end this or they're not going to extend him, I'm with you. They would be, it would be very unquazy like a guy who loves the stock market to sit on a stock he has no intention of keeping.
Yeah. And there are reasons to sit on the stock in a football / human dynamic standpoint. If I called the Niners and they offered a 3rd-round pick this year and let's say their 2024 1st-round pick, I run to the bank. If I could get a 1st-round pick in either this year or next year's draft for Kirk Cousins, 1 year of Kirk Cousins, I take it. Mm-hmm. Well, who's going to play quarterback? I don't know.
I do.
And you will figure it out.
I do. If you can make that trade, look, the Bears and Carolina set parameters. Like they've done a trade. So we now know what the parameters are. So if you get San Francisco's 1st-round pick in 24 and you've got your own, you're going to take at least one of those picks, right? And try and move up.
If you love one of these quarterbacks.
Quarterbacks, right, which we think they might. That's another question. Like This whole thing is reckless speculation, but the Vikings are pushing us to speculate.
Oh, man.
Recklessly. They're pushing us by their moves.
Forcing our
which,
hand.
By the way, I'd like to applaud them. Crazy, Kevin, you're doing a great job. I love this. But like if you think about it, if you got a pick before the draft, if you got a first round pick from San Francisco for 24, you've got your own first round pick. You've got your own 2023 first round pick then, right? So you've traded Cousins. I mean, you're in a position to move up. And you're not going to have to give up the compensation that Carolina did to Chicago, but you're going to have to give up a lot. So you're now in a position to make that similar move with 2 first-round picks that you probably feel comfortable trading.
Now, if you don't get, maybe we could probably flesh this Kirk thing out maybe on Monday's episode. But we all might just be reacting to like the Vikings coming to terms with a cornerback or something. So we don't know what Monday's episode is going to entail. But I think if you got lowball, let's say you decided, hey, we're gonna Kirk, we're gonna shop. Where would you be okay going? The Niners are really the only logical fit right now, but maybe something else opens up here.
Sure.
If the Niners said, yeah, we're really wishy-washy because we do really like Purdy and Lance, and we also would like some flexibility beyond 2023, so we'll take Kirk, but we're not doing like an extension or anything. We just want Kirk for 1 year, much like. Was Bradford a 1-year deal, or did they when they traded for Bradford, the Vikings, was that a 1-year thing, or was he was under contract for a second year? I
think so.
Okay.
I have to go back and look, but I think you're right.
And that was a first round pick. But this would be like a true 1-year mercenary thing. If they said, we'll do it, but we're not going to go crazy because we're not going to extend him, so we'll give you a third. I would still consider that because now I'm getting some value for something that I have no intention of having around beyond the year. But I could see. If you wanted Kirk, if you want to still be competitive, write out the contract. If you wanted to draft a quarterback and have him sit behind Kirk Cousins, or maybe it's Hendon Hooker or something, and he sits behind Kirk, a professional, like I can listen to that argument. But if you've decided he's not going to be around beyond 2023, you should be seeing what kind of value he has on the market, and if he'd be willing to waive his no trade clause.
And both are fair, right? Like you don't have to trade him. And I would guess that if you went to him and said that you had found a trade partner, and so his agent obviously would call that team for the sake of this conversation, San Francisco, and they wouldn't extend him, my guess is he blocks the trade.
No.
Because Kirk being Kirk is going to want, like the whole thing is the extension, but like this isn't a mandate from us that he has to be traded. It's a shop him because that's probably the most responsible thing to do. Worst case, he comes back and plays out the contract. That's fine too. So yeah, I think the Vikings are putting themselves in a really good position, again, provided they can find the talent, starting with a quarterback. But I think the Vikings are positioning themselves really well to be in a situation right now where I think their fan base should feel really good about it.
Yeah, this is going to be super fun. This is going to be a potentially wild franchise-changing next 2 or 3 weeks and next couple months. And we got you guys covered here on Purple Daily Vikings Entertainment. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die. That carries more meaning, I think, now than it did maybe 2 or 3 days ago. Yep. The one guy that you wanted, if you ranked everyone in the world, like who do you want to see the Vikings win a Super Bowl? I think Bud Grant would probably be atop that list. Check out the Royce stories on the tribute episode we did earlier today. And yeah, we're just going to be kind of in reactionary mode starting tomorrow, the rest of the week. So you can find us on Purple Daily tomorrow. You can find us on Mackey and Judd as well. And emergency episodes as needed this time of year. Inject it.
We're on standby.
We are. We're just
on standby.
We don't sleep. We wait.
Turn us on.
This time of year. All right. See you guys tomorrow. Purple